Zuri Aking was only 28, but people in Nairobi already knew her as someone who could turn hard work into success. She had started her first logistics business with almost nothing, working long days, taking risks, and refusing to give up when things became difficult. Now she had just launched her second company, and things were finally going her way. She had even bought her first commercial building, a moment she had dreamed about for years. When her father called and invited the whole family to dinner, Zuri smiled. She thought this was the celebration she had been waiting for. Maybe, for the first time, her family would tell her they were proud of everything she had achieved. The dinner started like any other family gathering. Everyone laughed, shared food, and talked about everyday life. Zuri noticed that her father looked unusually calm, almost as if he had been waiting for the right moment to say something important. After everyone finished eating, he stood up and asked the room to be quiet. Zuri expected kind words or a toast to her success. Instead, her father looked directly at her and said, "I raised you. Everything you have today exists because of me. That means everything you own belongs to me." The room stayed silent. Then he continued, as if what he was saying was completely normal. He told everyone that children are investments. Parents spend years feeding them, paying school fees, buying clothes, and making sacrifices. According to him, when children become successful, they must repay everything they receive. He smiled and announced that Zuri's new commercial building should now be transferred into his name because it was time for his return on investment. Zuri could not believe what she was hearing. She looked around the table, hoping someone would object or tell her father he had gone too far. Instead, one by one, relatives nodded their heads and some even smiled proudly, as if he had spoken a simple truth that everyone understood. At that moment, Zuri realized something that shook her more than her father's words. This was not a sudden idea. This was not a joke. It was not even a request. Her family had already decided what they believed she owed them long before she walked through the front door that evening. As Zuri sat quietly after that shocking dinner, memories from her childhood came rushing back. She suddenly realized that this moment had not started that night. It had started many years earlier when she was just a little girl growing up in a modest neighborhood in Kisumu. There was one sentence she heard more than any other. Her father would often say, "Everything we spend on you is a debt you'll repay one day." At first, she didn't understand what he meant. She thought all parents took care of their children because they loved them. But as she grew older, she noticed something painful. Her brothers were never reminded about this debt. They received support without conditions. When they needed books, new clothes, or school supplies, no one kept talking about the cost. With Zuri, it was different. Every school fee was mentioned again and again. Every notebook, every uniform, every meal on the table came with a reminder that she would have to pay it back one day. If she thanked her parents, they would tell her to remember their sacrifices. If she made a mistake, they would remind her how much money they had already spent on her. Instead of feeling like a daughter, Zuri often felt like someone who had borrowed money she could never fully repay. Because of that, she pushed herself harder than everyone else. She studied late into the night, won scholarships whenever she could, and tried to reduce the burden on her family. Later, she worked small jobs, saved every coin she earned, and slowly built her first business from the ground up. Every success made her believe she was getting closer to earning the love and respect she had always wanted. But it never happened. The more successful Zuri became, the more her father talked about what she owed him. Every achievement only made him believe she could give even more. She had spent her whole life trying to prove she was a good daughter. She never realized that, in her father's eyes, she was never simply his child. She was an investment, and he believed the time had finally come to collect everything he thought he was owed. After the family dinner, Zuri didn't argue with anyone. She didn't raise her voice or try to convince her father that he was wrong. She simply went home with a heavy heart. The more she thought about what had happened, the more something didn't feel right. Her father's words had sounded too confident, almost as if he already believed the building belonged to him. That feeling stayed with her for days. Instead of reacting with anger, Zuri decided to ask a few quiet questions. She called an aunt she trusted and casually brought up the family dinner. The response surprised her. Her aunt laughed and said, "We thought everyone already knew. Your father has been talking about your building for weeks." Zuri froze. As she spoke to more relatives, the story became even more shocking. Her father had been proudly telling people that the commercial building would soon be transferred into it. He spoke as if it was already settled. Some relatives had even congratulated him for finally becoming a landlord. A few had already asked if there would be empty shops they could rent at a discount. Then Zuri learned something that made her stomach drop. Her father had promised part of the future rental income to several family members. He had told them that once the building was his, he would use the money to help the whole family. Some people were already making plans for money that had never belonged to them. No one had ever asked Zuri if any of this was true. No one had even spoken to her before making the plans. That was the moment everything became clear. Her father had never invited her to dinner to discuss it. He wasn't asking for permission or hoping she would agree. In his mind, the decision had already been made. He had already spent money that wasn't his and promised away property he did not own. For the first time, Zuri understood that arguing would change nothing. Her father believed he was entitled to everything she had built, so she stayed quiet. While everyone else believed the matter was settled, Zuri started preparing. She gathered property papers, bank records, business documents, and every important file she could find. She wasn't getting ready for a fight. She was getting ready for the truth. A few days later, Zuri asked her father if they could talk in private. She did not want another family argument or a loud scene. She simply wanted to understand why he believed he had the right to take everything she had worked for. She hoped that, away from everyone else, they could have an honest conversation. Her father listened for a moment, then laughed. To him, the answer was obvious. He leaned back in his chair and said, "In Africa, children belong to their parents forever. No matter how old you become or how much money you make, you can never repay what your parents have done for you." Then he started listing everything he could remember. "I bought your diapers when you were a baby. I paid your school fees. I bought your uniforms and books. I took you to the hospital when you were sick. I fed you every day. I made sacrifices so you could have a better life." With every sentence, his voice became stronger, as if he was presenting evidence in a court. To him, every expense from her childhood was proof that she owed him everything she had. Then he looked straight at Zuri and said the one sentence she would never forget. "Without me, you wouldn't even exist." Those words stayed in the air for a few seconds. Some relatives who were nearby quietly nodded in agreement. They expected Zuri to lower her head, say sorry, and promise to do whatever her father wanted. That was what everyone thought a good daughter should do. But Zuri stayed completely calm. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply looked at her father and said, "You're right. Let's calculate everything properly." For a moment, nobody spoke. Her father frowned, confused by her answer. A few relatives looked at each other, trying to understand what she meant. They thought she had finally accepted that she owed her father a huge debt. What they didn't know was that Zuri had already started collecting records, receipts, and bank statements. When she said, "Let's calculate everything properly," she wasn't talking about her childhood. She was talking about every single thing that had happened since she became an adult. And very soon, the numbers would tell a completely different story. That night, Zuri returned home and sat quietly at her dining table. She opened her laptop, brought out an old box filled with documents, and signed into her online banking. If her father wanted to talk about debts, then she decided they would look at the facts instead of emotions. She began going through years of records, one by one. At first, she thought it would only take a few hours. But as she searched through old emails, bank statements, and payment receipts, she realized just how much she had done for her family without ever keeping score. There were hospital bills she had paid when relatives became sick. There was the money she spent repairing her parents' house after heavy rains damaged the roof. She found receipts for school fees she had paid for younger cousins so they would not be sent home from class. Every month, she had quietly sent allowances to help with groceries, electricity, and other household needs. The list kept growing. She found records of business loans she had paid back after relatives failed to repay them. She found payments for emergency surgeries that saved the lives of family members. There were funeral expenses she had covered when others could not afford them. She even found small transfers she had completely forgotten about, sent to help someone buy medicine or pay rent during difficult. Every payment told the same story. Whenever someone in the family had a problem, they called Zuri, and almost every time, she said yes. She never asked to be repaid. She never reminded anyone of her sacrifices. She simply helped because they were family. As the total kept increasing, Zuri stopped typing for a moment and stared at the screen. The number was far bigger than she had expected. For years, she had believed the story that she owed her father everything. But the records in front of her told a different story. Instead of being in debt to her family, she had spent years carrying them financially. If anyone was keeping a real ledger, it showed something shocking. Zuri did not owe her family hundreds of thousands. Her family owed her. Zuri knew that if she showed the records to her family the way they were, they would probably say she had made everything up. So she decided to do it the right way. She contacted her accountant and asked for help organizing every payment she had made over the years. She also met with her lawyer to make sure every document was clear, accurate, and impossible to question. For several days, they worked through stacks of papers and digital records. Every bank transfer was matched with a bank statement. Every receipt was placed in order by date. Medical bills, school fees, house repairs, emergency expenses, business loans, funeral costs, and monthly allowances were all listed carefully. Nothing was based on memory alone. Every amount had proof behind it. Her accountant checked the numbers again and again to make sure there were no mistakes. Her lawyer reviewed every page and made sure the report was easy to understand. It was not an emotional letter or a personal attack. It was simply a complete financial record of everything Zuri had paid for since she became an adult. Finally, they reached the last page. At the top, in large bold letters, were the words, "Outstanding family debt." Below that was the total amount. For a few seconds, the room was completely quiet. Even her lawyer looked at the final number and slowly shook his head. He knew Zuri had helped her family many times, but even he had not expected the total to be so high. Years of quiet generosity had added up to an unbelievable amount of money. Zuri took a deep breath. She wasn't happy about the number. In fact, it made her sad. Every payment represented a moment when someone in her family needed help, and she had been there without asking for anything in return. When the report was finished, she printed every page on high-quality paper and placed them in a professional binder. It looked like an important business report, not a family argument. Then she put the file away and waited. She was no longer interested in shouting, defending herself, or proving a point with emotions. When the time came, she would let the facts speak for themselves. A few weeks later, the whole family gathered in Nakuru for a large celebration. Relatives had traveled from different towns, and the house was full of laughter, music, and conversation. Zuri knew her father would be there, but she said very little. She greeted everyone politely and kept the professionally bound folder close to her. As the evening went on, people began talking about family, success, and tradition. Then, just as Zuri expected, her father stood up to speak. With a proud smile, he pointed toward Zuri and told everyone how successful she had become because of his sacrifices. He repeated the same words he had said at the family dinner. "She still owes me her life," he said confidently. "Everything she has today is because I raised her." Several relatives nodded. A few even started clapping. Before the applause could spread through the room, Zuri quietly stood up. Without saying a single angry word, she walked over to her father and placed the thick folder on the table in front of him. "I have something for you," she said calmly. "Please read the first page." The room became quiet. Her father looked confused, but slowly opened the folder. The first page explained that it was a complete record of every major expense Zuri had paid for the family over the last 10 years. As he turned the pages, the room grew quieter and quieter. There were bank transfers for medical bills, receipts for house repairs, payments for school fees, records of monthly allowances, proof of emergency surgeries, business loans, funeral expenses, and many other costs that Zuri had covered without ever asking for recognition. Every page revealed another sacrifice. One by one, the smiles disappeared from the faces around the room. Relatives who had always believed Zuri only received support from the family were now seeing a very different story. Some leaned closer to read the documents for themselves. Others lowered their heads, unable to say anything. For the first time, everyone understood the truth. The person they thought had been living because of the family had actually been carrying the family, and she had done it quietly, asking for nothing in return. Her father quickly closed the folder and pushed it away. His face had completely changed. The confidence he had shown only a few minutes earlier was gone. Looking around the room, he tried to laugh as if the report meant nothing. "This is different," he said. "Parents should never receive a bill from their children. A mother or father gives everything without expecting payment." For a moment, nobody spoke. Zuri looked at him calmly. She did not argue about the report or raise her voice. Instead, she nodded and said, "I agree." Her father looked surprised. Then Zuri asked one simple question that changed everything. "If parenting is priceless, why were you charging me for it?" The room fell completely silent. No one had an answer. Her father opened his mouth as if he wanted to speak, but no words came out. The same man who had confidently listed diapers, school fees, hospital bills, and every sacrifice he had made could no longer explain why those things were suddenly beyond price when the same idea was applied to him. The silence felt heavier than any argument. Relatives looked at one another, unsure of what to say. Some remembered all the times they had heard her father remind Zuri that she owed him for raising her. Others remembered how often Zuri had quietly helped the family without asking for anything in return. For the first time, people began asking themselves difficult questions. Had they accepted his words for years without ever thinking about them? Had they been unfair to Zuri all along? An elderly aunt slowly shook her head. A cousin who had always defended her father looked down at the Nobody rushed to support him anymore. The respect and authority her father had always depended on started disappearing right in front of everyone. It wasn't because Zuri had insulted him or embarrassed him. It was because the truth had exposed a contradiction that no one could ignore. He had spent years saying that a child should repay every sacrifice a parent makes. But when Zuri showed everything she had sacrificed for the family, he suddenly claimed that love should never be measured by money. At that moment, everyone in the room understood the difference between genuine love and control. And for the first time, Zuri no longer had to defend herself. The facts had already done it for her. After the room became quiet, everyone waited to see what Zuri would do next. Some relatives thought she would demand every shilling back. Others expected her to take her father to court or publicly shame the family for everything they had done. But Zuri had already made her decision. She slowly closed the folder, looked around the room, and spoke in a calm voice. "I didn't bring these records because I want anyone's money," she said. "I'm not going to sue anyone, and I'm not asking for repayment. I made those payments because I cared about this family. I don't regret helping people who truly needed it." The relatives listened carefully. Then Zuri continued, "But from today, things will be different." She explained that she would no longer send monthly allowances just because someone expected them. She would no longer pay surprise bills or rescue relatives every time they made poor financial decisions. Nobody would have unlimited access to her bank account, her business, or her time simply because they were family. "If someone needs my help in the future," she said, "they can ask me with respect. I'll think about it the same way I think about any business proposal. If I can help, I will. If I can't, the answer will be no. And no one will use guilt to change my mind." The room stayed silent as everyone understood what her words really meant. Her father looked shocked. For years, he had believed he could always tell Zuri what to do. He thought he could pressure her into paying every expense and solving every family problem. He had never imagined that one day she would calmly set clear boundaries without shouting or arguing. At that moment, he finally realized what he had truly lost. It wasn't the commercial building. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the chance to receive more financial support. The greatest thing he had lost was the control he had held over Zuri for so many years. And for the first time in her life, Zuri walked away from a family gathering feeling lighter. She wasn't carrying guilt anymore. She was carrying peace. A few months later, life looked very different for Zuri. Instead of spending her time dealing with family drama, she focused on growing her business. Her logistics company expanded into Kampala, Uganda, opening new opportunities she had worked for over many years. For the first time in a long time, she felt free. She was no longer carrying the heavy burden of trying to earn love by giving away everything she had. The family also changed. After learning the truth, a few relatives called Zuri to apologize. They admitted they had believed only one side of the story. They thanked her for everything she had quietly done for the family and said they wished they had appreciated her sooner. Others, however, continued to support her father and insisted he had done nothing wrong. Zuri didn't argue with them, and she had learned that not everyone wants to accept the truth, and she no longer needed everyone to agree with her. She simply lived her life and protected her peace. Looking back, she finally understood something that had taken her years to learn. Children can love, respect, and honor their parents without giving up their dreams, their savings, or their future. Real love is given freely. It is never used as a debt that must be repaid forever. Her father believed that giving her life meant she would always owe him everything. But the report she placed in front of him proved something he never expected. The greatest debt in that family was never Zuri's. It was the gratitude they never showed to the daughter who had spent years quietly carrying everyone else.